the capacity to recover. All of these athletes can train a phenomenal amount. And that's one of the things that I noticed in CrossFit when I was lucky enough to go on some training camps with a few of the top athletes, and their ability to just do more work than the normal person is breathtaking. You can't believe it until you've seen it for the first time, that they can do sessions which would write a normal person off for a week, and they'll do 4 of them in a day with a few minutes rest in between, just a quick drink, maybe a bite of a banana, quick check of the messages on the phone, and then they're off into the next one. And where does that come from? I think a huge part of it is genetic. We all know people recover at different rates, but the other thing to say is that it's built up over time. A lot of elite athletes have been in elite training programs or training hard from quite a young age, so their body has just adapted to a huge training volume. And I think you see that in the gyms, where people who've come from a professional sport background, they are just able to do and recover from more training, because it's sort of in their history that their body just does more work and is able to repair and recover a little bit faster. And yeah, some people, there's not a huge amount you can do about it. If you're just slow to recover, it means you can train less, which means the rate at which you can improve your performance will be slower. And that's why it's a unifying characteristic at the top of all sports, is because if somebody else can practice a lot more than you in the same period of time, they're going to improve. Unless their training is absolutely awful quality, they should be improving faster than you. And if you don't have that, it probably is such a limiter that you won't be able to compete. If somebody's got a compounding interest effect of training slightly more than you per day, week, month, year, over the long run, unless the efficacy of your training is that much better, it's going to be a really tall order for you to compete with them at the highest level. But I think, yeah. So I was just going to say that from a practical perspective, for the everyday athlete, what can you take away from that is the importance of recovery. If you want to be able to train more, then prioritizing all the things you do in your normal day-to-day life to recover as hard as possible, which means you're going to get the most out of the training you can do, and actually increase that training volume that you can handle over time. So I think episode 33 was our top tips on how to recover. Have a check out of that if you can, and some practical tips there to recover faster. But the other thing you can do is just try to improve your training volume over time. Like, the more you do, the more you can do. And we talked about this, I think, in the programming episode 2, which is episode 48 or 49, I think, the concept of maximum recoverable volume. So the more training you do, the more you are then able to do. However, if you start going over that line, then that will negatively impact your results and your performance. So just be aware of, if you're flirting with that maximum recoverable volume line, if you overstep the mark, you need to just be willing to dial it back in to let your body actually recover, so you can then start moving forward again.
Yeah, because we touched on the Garmin data, didn't we? And like the numbers there. What's actually interesting is a side thing on that. Because my power meter on my bike wasn't linked to my watch, all the cycles that I was doing was not actually going towards my data. Because when it pulled information in from, say, Zwift and Trainer Road and stuff like that, it was going into Garmin, but it didn't count towards my training volume on the body. So why my numbers were so low was because it was thinking I wasn't actually doing that much output. So it only take into account my maybe 2 runs a week at the most, and maybe my bit of lifting I was doing. So all the cycling I was doing wasn't getting counted. So I did wonder, I was like, I'm pushing. I'm like, but my numbers say I'm fine. And that was basically, but that was why. So, and then since I've linked it up, my numbers have shot up. And, you know, as you say, I'm flirting in that line of being in that optimal training, you know, progressive, right? Just maybe getting towards the top, but then tapering off a little bit and so forth. But just a point that I wanted to bring up on that. And I'd say the part about, I'd say maybe the type of sport you do can also determine the age. So you said about, obviously, like, you know, people come in, say, genetically, like maybe when they've been training when they were young, doing loads of it, and like their body has become accustomed. But I guess maybe where the sport might be less impact and so less trauma. Maybe that I know obviously when you say golf, when you're playing as a kid, you're going to ingrain these movement patterns. But I guess maybe as you get a bit older, maybe you got these latecomers. And it's like, because also happens in triathlon, I notice, and like, cause I've been looking into that. I've been seeing quite a lot of newcomers that have only just got into it, say late 20s, early 30s, and they're then doing really well. And it's maybe because of the low impact, obviously take away the running, but as in like the low impact of it on, say, the joints. Is that maybe a consideration that maybe the type of sport as well depends on the type of like capacity to recover?
Definitely. Yeah. I think anything that's really stressful on the body is going to impact the amount of it that you can do. So I think, yes, you're spot on. That's why a lot of sort of older athletes get into things like cycling, is because the other sports that they used to play were just beating up their body too much. So they're able to do more of it and get away with it. Whereas, I think you don't get many 60-year-olds taking up rugby, for example, because it's just so damaging for their body. They're probably not going to be able to recover quickly enough to put meaningful training into play. But yeah, that is an interesting point, actually. I think that if you're choosing your sport, then considering those factors probably doesn't get as much respect as it probably might do.
And do you know, because the only reason why I thought that as well is because so my dad's turning 60 next year, and so he'll be going in for the Ironman. That's the bracket where he just hits the start of the new bracket, basically 60 to 64, something like that. And when I just put that into perspective in my head, he didn't realize he was turning 60. I was like, oh yeah, you're in the new bracket next year. He was like, no, I still got a year or two. I was like, no, I think you're 60 next year. He was like, oh yeah, shit, I am. And it's just like the reality of that, of just like that amount of stress on the body at 60. And just like, it just shows obviously he's been accumulating that much volume and stuff over the years. But it's amazing that if you put him into a different sport, because he got into this very late, but if you put him into a different sport, his body just probably wouldn't be able to take it. And it's just because of the relatively swimming and cycling are so low impact, that's just the running, which he doesn't run loads of marathons. So it'll be just like, it's a lot actually lower volume getting, because with the Ironman, it's more about just finishing it. And especially on that level, it's about just getting to the end within the cutoffs and so forth. But I think when it comes to, like, say, CrossFitters and stuff, and weightlifters and like the amount of load going through your body, so like external load, and that's where it can really start to take a battering. And it's, taking that time for recovery, I guess, is so key, especially for the everyday athlete, because we mentioned it, I think, in the last episode, and where we have all the extra stresses in life that all accumulate together. So stress is stress on the body, and if you're not taking that into consideration, then it's all going to be taken away from your, how you feel. And if you're not recovering in any way, then if you're stressing your body through training, stressing your body through work and family, that's a lot of stress. So you just, really have to be conscious. And I think that is a big defining factor of those elites, of where they understand where all their stresses are basically coming from in life. Yes, you have the every bits that just randomly come, but they understand most stresses that they can control. And they say, right, okay, I'm going to make sure I can stay. It's like what Matt Fraser did. He literally did as little as possible except for train to be the best. And that was why he was. So, go on, you were going to say something on that?
I was just going to say, actually, that's a really good point that you reminded me of, is that considering that the everyday athlete can't train or recover from as much training as an elite person, the bang for buck value from each session becomes more important, because if you can't train as much as somebody else, then you've really got to squeeze out as much benefit as you can from every session. So considering your recovery capacity, you can infer that to say, right, Joe Bloggs over there can train 1.5 times as much as I can, so I've got to make my sessions 1.5 times as effective as his to give myself a chance. And I think having that lens on your training, am I doing junk volume, or am I actually getting a meaningful stimulus out of this session? Being a bit more ruthless in that way can help you get more out of the limited training volume that you can handle.
Yeah, and I guess that thing of understanding that sometimes less is more because of the external stresses. And as literally, I was just having a conversation with one of my clients this morning about it, and she was like wondering why she's just feeling so beaten up. I'm like, because you not only have she does running, she's introduced rowing as well into her training before our sessions, and then we have our sessions. But because rowing goes before our sessions, she kind of counts it as one. So she knows it was the rowing, but then she's also had like the kid at home more. So there's that stress. Work's been, and I'm like, your body is just screaming at you to stop and also to fuel yourself. And it's so interesting because it's like we all think more, which we've touched on before. More is more, and more is then saying to you better, but in the right circumstance. And that's where you have to understand where, even if it's just yourself without a coach, but understanding where you are in your current circumstances, then accepting whatever you are, like wherever that is. And especially as an everyday athlete, you want to make sure you're balancing it. And it's a tough job. It really is.
Yeah. Always more until it's too much. I think that's probably the more accurate way of saying it.
Yeah.